Have you ever wondered how much of your thinking is truly your own? Not your beliefs, not your opinions, but the actual structure of your thoughts. The categories you use, the assumptions you make, even the way you define time, space, and identity. Most of us assume we think independently, that our minds are private, self-contained systems. But what if that's not the case? What if your thoughts are shaped by forces you didn't choose and may not even be aware of? From the moment you're born, you're surrounded by language, customs, values, and expectations. And over time, these patterns don't just influence your behavior, they shape the very way your mind works. This is the foundation of what psychologists and cognitive scientists call cultural cognition. The idea that your brain doesn't operate in a vacuum. It develops inside a culture, and that culture becomes the framework your brain uses to process reality. Welcome to Brain Scribbles, where we explore how the mind works, why it works that way, and what happens when you start asking better questions. In this video, we'll explore why you can't think without culture, and how understanding that can change the way you see yourself and the world around you. When we picture thinking, we often imagine it as something private, something that happens inside us, disconnected from the outside world. But in reality, the brain is a deeply social organ. It evolved not in isolation, but in groups. Tribes, families, shared systems of meaning. From a cognitive science perspective, this matters a lot, because the brain doesn't just process information, it depends on context to know how to process it. That context is culture. Culture gives the mind its working material: words, categories, customs, and shared assumptions. These aren't just accessories to thinking, they're the tools we use to think with. For example, when a child learns to speak, they're not just learning vocabulary, they're learning how to organize reality. What counts as a thing, what emotions have names, what stories are worth telling. And once those structures are in place, they shape how the brain interprets everything that comes after. This is why researchers describe the brain as a culturally embedded system. It's not just neurons, it's neurons that have been trained by a social world. Even something as simple as how we define a good life is heavily influenced by the culture we're raised in. So when we think, we're not just using logic or reason, we're using a framework that was handed to us, often unconsciously, by the people and systems around us. In other words, thought isn't purely individual, it's scaffolded by culture. One of the most powerful ways culture shapes thought is through language. Language isn't just a way to communicate what you're thinking, it plays a central role in shaping how you think in the first place. This idea is known as the linguistic relativity hypothesis, sometimes called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And while it's been debated for years, modern research has shown that language does influence how we perceive and process the world. Take color, for example. In English, we have one word for the color blue, but in Russian, there are two separate words, one for light blue and one for dark blue. And in experiments, Russian speakers are faster at visually distinguishing between shades of blue than English speakers. Or consider direction. Some indigenous Australian languages don't use terms like left or right. Instead, they use cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. So, to describe something, a speaker might say, "The cup is southwest of the plate." As a result, speakers of these languages develop an almost GPS-level sense of orientation, because their language constantly requires them to track their position in space. These aren't just quirks of grammar, they're differences in perception, in how the brain constructs reality. Even our emotional lives are shaped by language. Cultures that have more words for specific emotional states give people more precision in describing how they feel, and that in turn affects how those emotions are experienced and regulated. So when we say culture shapes thought, we're not speaking metaphorically. Language structures the categories your brain uses to process experience. It gives you the tools to notice some things and overlook others entirely, which means, in a very real sense, your language limits the thoughts you can have. When you think about memory, you probably imagine it as something stored deep in your mind, a personal archive of moments and facts, organized by your own experiences. But memory doesn't work that way. Cognitive psychologists and neuroscientists have shown that memory is not a fixed recording. It's an active process, one that is constantly being reshaped by your present context and by the people around you. In fact, most of what we remember is shaped not just by what happened, but by how it was told, who we talked to, and what cultural lens we use to make sense of it. This is called collective memory. The idea that memory is a social act, not just an individual one. For example, studies have found that people from collectivist cultures like Japan or China are more likely to recall memories that emphasize group activities, social harmony, or relationships. Meanwhile, people from more individualistic cultures like the US or Germany tend to recall memories centered on personal achievement, uniqueness, or emotional expression. Even the structure of memory changes. Western participants often recall memories from a first-person perspective, while people from East Asian cultures are more likely to remember events from an outside point of view, as if they're watching themselves from the outside. This isn't about right or wrong. It's about what the culture trains the brain to notice and prioritize. The result? Memory becomes a mirror, not of the past itself, but of the cultural story we've been told about what matters. And it doesn't stop there. The way you remember also depends on the language and narrative forms your culture uses. When you share a memory with someone else, you're not just reporting it, you're performing it, reshaping the memory in real time based on what's acceptable, expected, or emotionally valid in your social group. So, while we like to think of memory as personal and private, it's actually a shared construction, built with cultural tools, maintained through social interaction, and constantly edited to fit the version of ourselves that the world around us helps create. This means memory isn't just influenced by culture, it's dependent on it. What you remember, how you remember it, and what you forget are all shaped by the world you belong to. Most of us grow up with a sense of who we are. We might say things like, I'm independent, or I'm a people person, or I need to find myself. But have you ever stopped to ask, where did those ideas come from? Because even your sense of self, your personality, your values, your goals, isn't formed in isolation. It's shaped by the culture you're raised in. Different cultures define the self in different ways. In Western, individualistic societies, the self is often seen as independent, a distinct individual with personal goals, rights, and preferences. Success means being unique. Happiness is tied to self-expression, self-esteem, and personal freedom. But in many collectivist cultures, the self is viewed as interdependent, defined by relationships, roles, and obligations to others. Here, success means contributing to the group. Happiness is tied to harmony, duty, and belonging. And that changes how people think, feel, and act on a daily basis. For example, in studies where people are asked to describe themselves, Western participants tend to use personal traits. I'm creative. I'm ambitious. I like to read. But in collectivist cultures, people are more likely to say, I'm a daughter. I'm part of this community. I work with my family. Even the way we experience emotions is shaped by this cultural model of the self. In individualist settings, emotions like pride and personal achievement are emphasized. They support the goal of standing out. In collectivist settings, emotions like shame or gratitude are more prominent because they help regulate relationships and maintain group cohesion. So, culture doesn't just tell you how to behave. It tells you who you are, what kind of person you should become, what traits are admirable, what emotions are appropriate, what goals are worth pursuing. And over time, those values become the inner voice you call me, which means that your internal compass, your decisions, your dreams, even your doubts, are all shaped by a story that began before you did. You didn't choose that story, but you've been living inside it. And just like with language and memory, once you become aware of that influence, you can start to ask deeper questions. Not just who am I, but who taught me what it means to be me? We like to think of ourselves as rational, objective, impartial, clear thinkers. But even the way we define truth or evidence is shaped by culture. What counts as proof? What's seen as credible? What's considered common sense? Those answers vary from place to place because they come from shared assumptions, not universal logic. In one culture, personal experience might be sacred. In another, it might be dismissed as emotional. In some places, truth means consistency. In others, it means harmony. That doesn't make truth meaningless. It means it's contextual. We all think within frames, and the frame you use is often the one you were handed. Understanding this doesn't weaken your thinking. It strengthens it. Because once you see the frame, you can start to ask what's outside it. If your language, memories, emotions, and sense of self are all shaped by culture, is it even possible to think independently? It's a fair question, and the honest answer is not entirely. Every thought we have is filtered through experiences we didn't fully choose, the values we absorb, the assumptions we inherit. But that doesn't mean we're trapped. It means that true freedom doesn't come from rejecting influence. It comes from recognizing it. You may not be able to think outside of culture, but you can begin to think about it, to pause before reacting, to question where a belief came from, to notice when a value feels borrowed instead of chosen. That pause, That moment of reflection is independent thought. It's not about isolating yourself. It's about becoming aware of what's shaping you so you can decide what to keep and what to let go. So no, your thoughts aren't entirely your own. They were shaped by language, by values, by history, geography, and generations of people you've never met. But that's not a weakness. It's a reminder that you are part of something larger, a living system of shared meaning. And once you see that, you can begin to think with more awareness, more humility, and more freedom. Because the moment you realize your lens is cultural is the moment you can start to adjust it. Not to reject where you came from, but to choose consciously what to carry forward. So here's a question to leave with. What belief do you hold? That might just be a reflection of the world you were handed. If this gave you something new to think about, go ahead and like the video. And if you want more calm, clear explanations about how your mind really works, hit subscribe. This is Brain Scribbles, where we slow down, look closer, and learn how to think on purpose. See you in the next one.